Well, the summer break is over and MPs return to Parliament on Monday to begin the fall sitting. And Prime Minister Mark Carney will look to deliver on his agenda in a minority government position. Also, Conservative Leader Pierre Poilievre is back and will face off in the House of Commons in question period against Carney for the very first time. So our party insiders are here to talk about what's going to all happen on Monday. Melanie Richer, Greg McEachern, and Fred Delory. Look, Fred, question period is going to be its own thing, but the House meets to pass legislation. And the government has some bills coming. It has a budget coming that is both investment and austerity, we're told. Some parties might not like the investment. Other parties might not like the austerity. How does Mark Carney make this work without a majority?
I think he's going to have a much harder time than he thinks he is. I know during the election it seemed like he didn't really care if he got a majority or a minority. At least that was the impression that he was giving. And I think he's going to feel it this fall. Obviously, I'd say there's no threat to the government falling, but that doesn't mean you get your legislation through. It doesn't mean those bills get through the way you want them through. The NDP are not a committee either. That's a huge change in dynamics. It is the Liberals have the most seats, but the Conservatives have one less than them, and the Bloc Québécois are the tiebreaker on everything. And the Conservatives and the Bloc have worked together a lot over the last number of years. They're going to call in, there's going to be investigations, there's going to be witnesses, there will be ministers brought in when they don't feel like being brought into committee, when they have other things to do perhaps. There is going to be chaos there. They're going to make amendments to all the legislation that they want to do, and it's going to be hard. I think Carney's going to have a really challenging time getting his simple legislation through. All of it's going to be difficult. The budget is a different beast where that's no one wants an election, so no one is going to risk taking down the government at this stage. Okay.
Yeah, Greg, I interviewed Yves-François Blanchet the other night live on the show from Washington, D.C., of all places. It was, a rare thing, but he's not as cooperative as he sounded last fall, right, when it was about supply management and OAS. I mean, how do you think the Liberals need to approach this with the obstacles that Fred outlined there?
Well, there's, experience, there's precedents, Paul Martin, the type of negotiations that need to go on. It's not, as I think that there were people in the last Prime Minister's office that did not quite understand that the supply and confidence deal, when it ended, that, things were, could end rather quickly. So I think there's the other dynamic that's changed a bit, though, is I just wonder how much of a hammer the Conservative leader has to use on his own caucus. He's not riding high in the polls anymore. He's a drag on his own party, head-to-head with the Prime Minister. He's very, very far behind. And my guess would be that there are members of that caucus who endured some slings and arrows from Mr. Poilievre's people, and they may remember that. If you're doing smart negotiations and you're talking about parts of the budget, it may help your part of the country, even though you're a Conservative MP. Are you going to feel as sure and secure about opposing those things? If you look at some of the polling done of Conservative Party members about Mr. Poilievre, it's not super high. So I think that's probably one of the big advantages that the Prime Minister has. I think they're also going to address some of the big issues like crime, early on with legislation. That may take some of the slings and arrows away.
Yeah, I mean, Mel, it is a minority government situation again. Some of the top line numbers you see, the Conservatives are still pretty strong, the Liberals strong, but the leadership numbers for Mr. Carney, the Prime Minister, that's the bedrock of the Liberal political strength right now. How does the NDP approach this? Like they do not have the committee seats that, as Fred pointed out. What is their path through this as they try to pick their next leader in this context?
Right. I think they really need to spend the next fall kind of keeping the ship steady a little bit and keeping the Prime Minister accountable, particularly as it relates to workers, as it relates to regular people. I think making sure that working families don't get forgotten in these whole, big project ideas, or as we're talking about the economy, making sure that regular folks understand what it is that we're doing and how it impacts them and impacts them in a real way. I think that's where the NDP can live, particularly in this moment where, you're hearing a Liberal government that may sound a little bit like a Conservative government at times. I think there's a massive opportunity there for the NDP. But again, keeping the ship steady as you figure out what the leadership looks like that's okay, right? You shouldn't be making big policy plays. You shouldn't be, rocking the boat too much. Really, the caucus right now should be setting it up, bringing members back in, bringing fundraising levels up to help whoever the next leader is next March kind of kick off from a good place instead of from, where we are right now. So I think that's what the NDP should be doing in the fall. And I think there will be an opportunity because we don't, I said earlier that we heard the Prime Minister talk about good union jobs, which I was pleased to hear, but we don't necessarily hear the Prime Minister talking that much about working people. So I think it's an opportunity for them, particularly in the fall.
Right. Yeah, and we're going to see a bunch of things that will test his support with progressives, like this climate competitiveness strategy, which could mean the peeling back of even some more Trudeau-era environmental policies. But, Fred, going back to your point about the committees, and the fact that it isn't a majority and it doesn't have a supply and confidence agreement. We just talking earlier about how all the First Minister's table is getting along really well, and a lot of corporate Canada is getting along really well. If the committees and the House go back to something like it was last year, where it wasn't a functional, stable place. Do you think there's a tolerance and an appetite for that in the country right now?
We'll see how it plays out. It may upset a lot of people. It may annoy a lot of people. If projects in any way, I know the legislation's already passed to get these fast-tracked, but if there's other things that seem to be bogging things down, I think the electorate would be upset with that. How that plays out, though, knowing that we're still far from an election, I don't know. I mean, Poilievre, coming into this House, he's coming back. Him and Carney have not faced off each other other than a debate they had, the English and French debates during the election. Carney was elected Prime Minister without being an MP, and then Poilievre lost his seat after the last election. So the two of them have not been in the House at the same time. So that dynamic is going to be interesting to see, and how aggressive Poilievre can be. His leadership review is in January. Who's he talking to for the next 3 months? Is he talking to Canadians, or is he just talking to Conservative Party faithful that will be at the convention? That's two very different audiences.
So how do you see that dynamic going between the two of them?
It's funny because if he goes aggressive and tries to just get the support for his leadership review and lock that in, which I think he's already pretty solid ground right now.
Yeah.
But if he really plays to that and not to Canadians, well, his numbers are going to go down further potentially. And if that happens, will that get into people's heads that, well, do we have a problem with his leadership? And that's one of the things he needs to be cautious about. And I would be advising to try to get a little bit more to the middle ground where most Canadians are when you're talking to people this fall session.
Greg, how do you expect to see that playing out? I mean, look, they'll have to negotiate on legislation and on budgets and these things and manage the committees. But that dynamic between the two leaders, one who's a lift on the party and one who right now is a bit of a drag, as you said. I mean, how do you expect to see that play out?
I always, I kind of roll my eyes at the amount of attention the first day back in question period, because quite often it ends up being a false start. It's like someone's shoelaces are tied together and the gun goes off and they fall, because there's so much pressure on that.
Well, luckily me and Rosie are co-hosting a special around the first day, so we'll trip.
Let us know what time you want us to drop by to boost your ratings. But I think that the challenge, I've seen enough clips of the Conservative leader, despite the story in July that he was changing his tone. We heard it last week about the Costanza, Seinfeld stuff. We heard it today. I'm not seeing much of a change. And to your question to Fred about how Canadians will react if there's monkey business at committee, I don't think they're going to like it. And I think that he sounds like last year. And people are looking at 2026 right now. They're not looking at 2024.
Yeah, like Mel, I see warning signs for politicians in all directions that it's a serious moment, stakes are high, let's all act like professionals and grown-ups when we go back to Parliament. And I think the government can't be screwing around with stuff and the opposition can't be unnecessarily blocking things up. Let's focus on the serious tasks at hand. So with that, how do you see this dynamic playing out? Because the main event on the days when they're both in the House of Commons will be Mark Carney versus Pierre Poilievre. What do you anticipate is going to come from that?
I feel like this was built up before the election of, Pierre Poilievre has been in the House for a long time. He's good at this stuff. He's going to take Mark Carney to task in the debates. And the debates came and it was kind of just like, oh, he showed up, but he didn't really do all that much. Not that I think the Prime Minister did particularly well either, but he was kind of on the defense the whole time. So I don't know how it's going to play. I don't know that it's going to be anything special. Again, without the figuring out what it is actually that you're going to say and what it is that you're standing for, I think it's just going to kind of fall a little bit flat, or if not flat, again, like you're making a mockery or it's going to be a joke. That's kind of been Pierre Poilievre's style. And to your point, in this moment where we're asking our people to be a little bit more serious, a little bit more collaborative, I don't know that folks are going to have a lot of appetite for it. It'll be interesting to see how the Prime Minister responds, because it'll be, a little bit more as a constant thing every day. And obviously we'll see how many questions he takes. But we saw Pierre Poilievre get under the Prime Minister Trudeau's skin. So it'll be interesting to see if he gets under Prime Minister Carney's skin. But again, in a moment where we're asking people to act like grown-ups, and we know that the House hasn't looked like that always, it'll be interesting to see if any of that can even play well.
Right. And Greg, one of the persistent criticisms of the Trudeau years is that they didn't pay enough attention to the economy. I don't think we're going to ever hear that about Mark Carney. They may argue about the results and the measures and the decisions, but not the focus. The other was crime and justice issues. And there's legislation coming this session. The Prime Minister was talking about it, that if our laws aren't working, the laws need to change. That is also a big shift for, I know it's under new management, but for the Liberal government.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a big focus on it the first week, 2 weeks. I hear that there's 3 pieces of legislation. There's been some hints around this from the caucus retreat. They need to address things that, Premier Ford has been raising, other people have been raising. Look, I've had my car stolen. It was recovered, thank God. I should have kept my 12-year-old car. But, they need to address bail, sentencing, delays, intimate partner violence, things around AI, revenge porn through deep fake. Yeah. They're going to hire, I think, 1,000 more RCMP officers, probably the same amount border security. So that is based on a lot of conversations that the government was having with the provinces over the summer, with law enforcement, with legal organizations that help with transition or rehabilitation. There's been a lot of conversations. So again, I don't buy the government took the summer off, because sure. I'm not seeing it. But I think you're going to see a lot of that. And those thorns that were thorns of criticism towards this government, they're going to be addressing it really early on. And it's going to be tough for a lot of the tough on crime Conservatives to hear what they've been asking for and then, decide whether or not they're going to put up or shut up.
Yeah, it's tough to take yes for an answer sometimes. But, Fred, Pierre Poilievre says, steal my ideas. And they say, yes. Sure. So if they are implementing a Get Tough on Crime agenda, and the Premier of Alberta is praising them for showing flexibility and moving in the right direction on economic development, what's left? What do you do?
Well, let's see how they implement it. They're going to steal our ideas. Let's see, are they serious? Are they actually going to try to make them work? Crime is a major, major issue. It's what won the Conservatives a lot of seats in the last election. It was a sleeper issue for a lot of people. And the Liberals, for years, have not taken crime seriously. This is still a Liberal government, despite the new Prime Minister. It's still on them to fix many of the things that they hadn't fixed over the last number of years. Again, if they want to come in with new ideas or conservative ideas and do it, but it's how they implement it. Will it work? Will they take it seriously? And I really hope it's not going to be like the old Liberal government where they announce a lot of things but not do a lot of things.
Mm-hmm. Right, so Mel, just on that, and we'll give you the last word here. I mean, there is this wait and see on how you deal with Trump, right? Because there is a baked-in recognition that he's Donald Trump. And you have a limited amount of influence. But on the domestic stuff, the crime agenda, the economic development agenda, that is stuff that Mark Carney can do and what he's going to be held to account for. So is that now the focus for delivery, for political security, you think, for this government, or how do you view it?
I think so, as long as it's tied to how people are feeling. If people start shifting the way that we're feeling, and it's not necessarily tied to, Donald Trump because Donald Trump is kind of quiet, or it's not necessarily tied to, the macro economic picture of what Canada looks like, then you can't always talk about that, right? You need to talk about what folks are actually up against. If people's mortgages continue to go up, if their grocery prices keep going up, or, if they're having a hard time making ends meet, and you're not talking about that in that way, which, Mark Carney doesn't necessarily talk the same way that Justin Trudeau did, which is a good thing, but also you're sometimes missing a little bit of that emotional connect, right? So if folks start feeling a certain way and the government's not responding to it, then that could get away from them quickly, and they'll need to address that. So I think being able to make adjustments depending on how people are feeling will be important this fall with the President Trump and without.
Yeah, the climate plan and the budget, that's going to be interesting to see how the political reaction and the public reaction is to that.